So, Patrick, what is your book, Step Back and Leap, about?
Well, Robert, Step Back and Leap is, I think, best characterized as a memoir meets self-help book for kind of type A, high octane business people. You go to business school and nobody has a manual on how to bounce back after a divorce or how to bounce back after your startup fails or how to make a 180-degree career shift. A story of my life, which is interesting, humorous, and dramatic all at the same time, coupled with some useful tools that I know will help people figure it out.
You are CMO of Google Play, but you were also fired twice as CMO in Silicon Valley
Yeah.
roles, all within 18 months. So why are you the right messenger to help people find out what they really want to do in life?
I think there's a couple of answers to that. I think, first of all, I want to demystify this idea that success is only what we see on Instagram feeds. If you look at anybody who has had any measure of success in business, in politics, in sports, in whatever, most of those people have one amazing characteristic, which is their ability to continuously get up after being knocked down. And that is really, I think, what defines us. When you talk about Silicon Valley and getting fired, I take it as a badge of honor. I learned a lot from those experiences. Those are some of the experiences that I want to share in the book.
Welcome, participants. We have a high-level group listening today, including people on at least 5 continents by my count. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're listening from. About Patrick. Patrick Mork has led so far an INSEAD life, we can say, with a Belgian mother and a Norwegian father, who, by the way, is signed up and I believe listening today. Welcome. Patrick's pre-college school included stints in Singapore and Mexico, as he describes also in his book. He studied foreign service at Georgetown and is a 2000 J, I believe, INSEAD MBA. His work experience took him through Boca Raton, Rio, Santiago, Barcelona, Madrid, London, Silicon Valley, back to Chile, now in Miami, although he's joining us from Chile today. Patrick was a Silicon Valley marketing guru, you could say, having been CMO 3 times, and helped launch the Google Play brand as the CMO of that division. It's now a $42 billion business. Since 2017, Patrick has moved on from marketing to bring his vast experience to help other managers, from startup CEOs to corporate managers, and to help them realize their best life through his coaching company. He has recently published a book, which I have read, gained a lot from, called Step Back and Leap, which is partly autobiographical and also full of exercises and tools to help the readers find their purpose, uncover their values, and unlock their goals. Patrick has coached leaders of companies such as Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Unilever, and CEOs of many startups. By my count, in the book, you can go through 22 different exercises that Patrick lays out to help you think about what you really want in life and to create a robust approach to get there, including support from people that can help you get there. So, Patrick, do you have anything to add to the intro? Anything to correct?
No, I think it's been pretty comprehensive, Robert, but thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be with all of you people here today and share whatever wisdom, learnings, and failures I can in the process that'll be helpful to you.
Patrick, you had senior roles at multinationals such as Google, Pepsi. You led marketing and more with startups. But you were also twice fired from Silicon Valley CMO roles in 18 months and had a near tragic encounter with a garbage truck. What makes you the oracle of the 9 keys to unlock one's life?
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's a couple of ways to answer that question. The first thing is, I think when you look at Silicon Valley and you look at the world of startups and the rate at which our world is changing today, we are facing a level of pressure and change which is unprecedented. And I think anybody who has kept pace with what's happening with artificial intelligence and how that's changing the landscape in business, we'll see that. And I think like many INSEADers and other MBAs and high-powered people, my belief is that to be successful and happy in life and in business, you have to step out of your comfort zone and be willing to try a lot of different things, many of which are difficult, many of which are but perhaps impossible, and many of which are outside of your comfort zone, outside of what you know how to do. And I think when you go out and you do that, you're going to fail. You know, there was a statistic once that talked about Michael Jordan, the number of missed shots Michael Jordan has had in his career, despite all the victories that he's had. And it's monstrous, but only people focus on the wins and on the successes. And so I think, you know, my challenges with my career are a function of living my life that way, with the intent of trying new things and of learning. And as a result, I've made some mistakes along the way, many of which, you know, I talk about in this book. And so I think, you know, that is the kind of decision that many of us are going to have to choose to make these days when we look at our career. Is you're going to go out and you're going to try stuff, and guess what? It's not going to work. And in some cases, it's going to end up badly. And, you know, I made a couple of poor choices, but the great thing about those choices is that they forced me to look at my life, and they forced me to look at my decisions and my values, which were incredible learning experiences, and which made subsequent decisions better, but not perfect.
This is sort of like what you wrote in the book, that failure has a reputation it doesn't deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, if you look at the business challenge today, when I talk to CEOs and I talk to boards, you know, from Santiago to North America to London, everybody says the same thing. Everybody is saying, I need my teams to innovate more. I need my organization to be more proactive. I need to have new products and services. I need to be taking more risk and trying new things. And yet we tolerate and sometimes encourage cultures that penalize failure. And this is particularly true in some cultures more than others, right? In the United States, I think, particularly in Silicon Valley, you know, failure is a badge of honor. It's a part of the process. And so what I try and say in the book, you know, and I have a whole chapter that talks about that, is that if we really want to live lives of meaning and purpose, and if we really want to have organizations that are at the cutting edge of innovation and are continuously adapting themselves to not just technology changes, but business and societal changes, cultural changes, you know, environmental changes, then we have to shift our perspective on failure. And we have to see failure as a necessary precursor to success and as a path to learning, and not as something that is frowned upon, something that is penalized, something where people feel humiliated, because that is ultimately what not only holds back our organizations, but it's what holds back our individual human potential.
You also write about failing fast in the book. What do you mean by failing fast?
Yeah, this is something that really comes from my time in Silicon Valley. You know, what I mean by failing fast is there's another wonderful book that I read on this journey to reinvent myself, because, you know, when I was failed that second time, I was so lost that I just chose to invest an enormous amount of time, you know, taking diagnostics, understanding myself better, reading, talking to a lot of people. And one of the things that you see in Silicon Valley culture and in technology culture is this idea of A/B testing. It's this idea of constantly testing things all the time, right? And in software, that's part of how you develop great software programs, right? And have great software products. You're always out there testing new things. In marketing these days, a big part of marketing is A/B testing creative. You know, you put out these digital marketing campaigns and you're testing, you know, the red banner versus the blue banner, the blue banner versus the green banner, et cetera. And so the idea is to get data very quickly in the search for truth. And what I'm saying in the book is that we have to shift our perspective to do that more with our own lives. We have to develop a skill set around resilience and around change. Right? Because the reality is that human beings, if you look at the neuroscience behind how our brains work and how we think and operate, not only in business, but in our personal lives, we're creatures of comfort. We're creatures of habit. This is why, you know, it's so difficult for people to stop smoking, or it's so difficult for people to eat properly or to change their bedtime routines, because you get into a habit and you can't get out, right? Because it's just easier to stay there. So what I say in the book is kind of, in Silicon Valley, we always say, for example, when it comes to hiring, hire slowly, fire fast, right? You want to hire very slowly and really take your time. And, you know, I have lots of podcasts and stuff where I talk about this, but when you know that something is not working, you have to be able to just cut the cord and rapidly move on, right? It's like, for example, you know, when you have somebody in your business that you know is not cutting it, is not doing the job, sometimes we have a tendency to really want to salvage that person, but not necessarily because of them professionally, but because of the relationship that we have, right? Similar dynamic exists when we talk about family businesses, where because it's a family business, we treat the team as a family, when in reality, we should be treating our teams as sports teams. In sports teams, when you have a weak link, generally you cut pretty fast and you make a change to the roster. In family businesses, sometimes we keep people knowing they're not the best for the role because we have a personal and emotional connection, right? So what I'm saying is you have to be able to fail fast and iterate and try many things very quickly so that you arrive at the truth of what you need to make the right decision.
So we have a bunch of INSEADers and also non-INSEADers, but your family name Mork is well known among INSEAD veterans. Not just because you slacked off apparently in period one. Can you tell us about your family connection with INSEAD?
I'm second generation at INSEAD. I graduated in 2000. I've always been a huge supporter of the school, not just because of the school, but because of what I think it stands for. And because I think of what the school is trying to do as promoting business as a force for good, which means a lot to the school. It means a lot for me personally, but also, my father, Eddie Mork, who's, actually on this call, he was INSEAD class of 68. One of the first promotions actually to move from the Chateau into the main building on the Fontainebleau campus. And subsequently to that, he was on the board of the school for 8 years. He, continues to be on the advisory board and was one of the founding members of the Singapore campus. And him and I were big sponsors and endorsers of the San Francisco hub. So, we always joke how kind of like our blood runs green in this family because of how deeply connected we are to the school. And how much it means to us. So, it's more to us than just a school.
Do you find people wanting to reinvent themselves more these days? And what are the typical catalysts of that?
Great question. The answer to that is yes. And I think it's interesting to divide the response in two parts. I was on a call with a guy that I worked with at Google, who was at Google for 8 years in a senior sales role. And he's kind of going through this process of reinvention now after having been part of the layoffs at the beginning of this year. And then, the other day I came across somebody in Miami who's a very successful entrepreneur, sold his business for several hundred millions of dollars and is now in this post-exit new phase in his life where the first 6 months is great and the rest is slightly miserable because he's not figuring out why he's here, right? Which is why I always tell entrepreneurs, don't chase money and valuations, because if you're fortunate enough to get there, you will find a big gaping hole afterwards. And the interesting thing that I find as a coach is that tendency of looking for purpose and meaning is across generations. And it's more and more across cultures. I talk to people who are in their 40s and 50s who are thinking about how do I reinvent myself. I talked to a very, very, very talented MBA grad the other day in Canada who's going through the same thing, a woman in her 50s, incredibly talented, very successful, who's come to that point as well, where it's like, wow, I've done everything I want to do. What's next? But I also come across, men and women in their 30s, women particularly, who come to me and they say, I've had this career at Apple, or I've had this career at Google, or I've been doing this and I've worked so hard. And I've realized that the cost has been enormous, right? I was talking to one woman in Silicon Valley the other day who said, I thought that this was the be all end all and I got this role and everything's supposed to be awesome. And it's not. I'm still single and I don't have any children. And I feel like part of my life has just passed me by. Right. And so it's like, I can't say that, these are all representative sample size of the hundreds of millions of people out in the workforce. But definitely when I talk to people, the feeling that I get is that, once you get to a certain level of income, the money is becoming secondary. The position is becoming secondary. And people are starting to ask themselves more questions about not just like, what's my life all about? But they're starting to ask themselves like, how is my organization trying to have an impact? What is my organization doing beyond the broader context of selling a product or a service? And when I look at, what we achieved at Leap, which is the company I started in Chile 4.5 years ago, and why people stayed, we started hiring for this company when there was like one or two of us. And I remember we were getting hundreds of applicants for sales roles. And I couldn't understand why, because nobody knew the company. And when I interviewed people and I asked them, every single person said two things. They said, first, because I'm looking for a place where I'm going to be respected. And I have a feeling that this is a place where you guys put so much emphasis on your values and on your purpose, and in your culture, in your website, and in all your content, that I feel I would find a home here. And second, because, we were always talking about Leap's purpose as an organization. And it was front and center, not just in our website, but in every sales pitch, every sales document. Every time we were with clients, we would talk about why we exist as a company. We had, we were fortunate enough to develop such a talented team that over time, sometimes I ask myself, why do people on this team not go work somewhere else? When I know that we're a startup, we're cash strapped, and I know that these people could make 30 to 40% more money elsewhere. And by and large, the result was always the same answer to my question, which is people were staying because they felt this was a culture-driven company that had clear values and had a meaningful purpose. And this is what I seem to be seeing more and more. And as a matter of fact, a very well-known Harvard professor, Hubert Jolly, who was the CEO credited with turning around Best Buy, who now teaches at Harvard, recently published a leadership book on this topic, talking exactly about the same thing, and is now teaching a course at Harvard, around kind of like purpose-driven leadership. And so I think, we're also living in a time, Robert, when you look at the world and when you look at, the political landscape, we have just this gaping lack of leadership. It's like, I'm not a U.S. citizen, right? I'm not, super political, but when I look at kind of, the options that you have in the upcoming presidential election, it's not exactly inspiring, right? And so I think more and more, this is what people are looking for. They're looking for purpose, they're looking for meaning, and they're looking for people who embody those qualities in a leader, from my experience and from what I see.
So, because you're right that reinvention starts with this finding of your purpose. For yourself, you came, as I understand, to I am the magnetic energy that inspires people to live careers of meaning and impact. Can you discuss what that means to you and how people can find their purpose?
Yeah, it was very interesting because, when I was working with my coach, when I came to the realization I needed coaching, and, people in Silicon Valley had been telling me for years I needed coaching. My ex-wife had told me I needed coaching. And at Google, they told me I needed coaching. And the reality was, I was arrogant, right? I was proud. I was one of these people who think, well, I don't need coaching. I went to INSEAD, I'm a smart guy. I worked at Google, whatever. Until I realized I didn't have all the answers. And so one of the exercises that is part of coach training when you become an executive coach in the program that I took, which is the Coactive Training Institute in California, one of the things that you work through as a coach is figuring out what your purpose is, right? That's part of the 6-week training program. And in my case, it ended with that phrase that you just mentioned there. And in the course of that process, each one of it as business coaches, and I was surrounded in that class with people from NVIDIA, from Google, from HP, from Apple, all people who either wanted to incorporate coaching in their work, to become more what I call servant leaders, or people that were becoming coaches. And so for me, this idea of purpose that's the reason why I choose to exist and do the work that I do, is that I want to inspire people to lead lives that are more than just about money, their business card, and their position, because I believe that is more and more what people are looking for. And if I'm honest, the amazing thing of this work is, although I make a lot less money than I did at Google, the reward and the joy that I feel from this work is incredibly rich for me. And so helping somebody who works with me figure out their purpose, or helping a CEO who's running a company figure out how to imbue purpose in their organization, that's really rewarding work for me. Like, I feel that I have not only an impact on that person, but I have an impact on that person's team and on that person's team's team, and so on. And right. And so finding a purpose, and I talk about this, I have a whole chapter in the book where I talk about this.
Patrick, maybe talk a little bit about ikigai, a reason for being.
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go, actually, Robert. So, the short version, to the people in the audience today, thinking about this question of purpose, which sounds so, amorphous and so ambiguous, is Ikigai is a Japanese concept which talks about living a life of meaning, right? And the way the Ikigai works is that if you just Google it up, you will see that it's basically it's a framework of interlocking circles, right? And at the very center of that, the interlocking circles is the Ikigai, that is the meaning of your life. And so when you start this soul searching process of trying to ask yourself and figure out why you're here and what you should be doing and why you exist, you need to look at 4 components which are critical. The first is you need to look at, what does the world need, right? What really does the world need? What are the pressing issues? And God knows we face a lot of them, right? Climate change, I think it couldn't be more obvious given what we've seen the last couple of weeks. Obesity, cancer, discrimination, there's a million different issues that really need urgent people to address those issues. And so the first step of the Ikigai is, figure out something that the world needs. The second step is, okay, what am I really good at? Or what is my organization really good at? If you look at it from an organizational perspective, like what are the skills that I have and where do I really excel, right? The third thing is kind of like, what's my passion? Because, Steve Jobs talked about this and we always talk about passion. And I think it's awesome to have a passion, but the problem with the passion, and if you look at the complete framework of the Ikigai, you'll understand why it has to be all 4 components, is that passion is something that drives you. It's something that's exciting. It's something that you're really, you're really moved by. And that could be either something positive or negative, all right? Your passion can either be, I'm passionate about women's rights in the workplace. I'm passionate about diversity or inclusion. But you can also be passionate about negative things. You could be, you could be passionate against gun violence, right? And God knows the United States, we have a gun issue, right? You can be passionate about wanting to find a cure for cancer because it affected somebody in your family. I've lost several members of my family to cancer, right? And the very last part of the Ikigai, which is probably one that we always have to remind ourselves of, and as MBAs, one that constantly trips us up, this is one of the most constant things I get for feedback from people working with me, is this idea that at the end of the day, the reality is that you need to make a living from it. Somebody has to be willing to pay you to do this job, right? So when you look at the overlap of those 4 things, what the world needs, what I'm good at, what I'm passionate about, and what I can get paid for, if you can find that, you can find your reason for living.
Patrick, we talked about purpose, but what about core values? And because you write in the book about finding your core values as an important next step in reinventing yourself. Why do you think that's important? How do people unearth their core values?
Good question. So, the core values are important for a couple of reasons. And then, I can give an example in my case of what happened when you're not living in your core values, right? So, for example, when my wife left in 2015, it was an enormous blow to me, as it is, I think, to anybody who goes through a failed marriage. You ask yourself a lot of questions. You do a lot of soul searching. Some of the answers are clear. Some of the answers are not clear. But one of the realizations that I had, and I had this working with my coach, is we did a values exercise, right? And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. And I'll give one or 2 examples on this call about how you do that. But one of the things that I found through the work that I did with my coach is that one of my core values was the good father. That's what we call the value. You can call your values whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But in my case, I call that value the good father. And the good father, then, what you do when you find your core values is you write them out in 1 or 2 lines to describe what they mean to you. It also helps kind of like keep you focused on how to interpret that when you have a doubt. But as a value, one of the things that I was very committed to doing after my divorce is, I was committed to being the best possible father that I could be. And when I made that commitment, certain decisions in my life that I had to make become very easy, right? And the reality is most of us get into situations where we feel very unhappy with ourselves, we chastise ourselves, we feel guilty because we make decisions based on our careers or our work that we know, maybe we don't know it consciously, but we know somehow are trampling on our core values, right? So there's another example, Susan Wojcicki, who is the CEO of YouTube. It's known in Silicon Valley, and it was in her book, that she goes home to have dinner with her family at 6 o'clock every day. and she is the CEO of YouTube. Why? Because her family is a core value, in the same way that being a good father is a core value to me. And that's the reason that I'm in Chile this week. I'm not in Chile this week because I love being in Chile. I'm in Chile, and I flew down here for a couple of days because, I'm living in Miami right now and I want to see my kids as often as I can. So I come down here. How do we go about finding our core values? There's a couple of different ways to do that. One way you can do that is there's a simple exercise, which I talk about in my book, which is a question I'll leave to the audience here, is imagine that you are honored by the city that you live in for all your contributions to industry, the city, your company, to society, and they choose to erect a billboard or a monument in your honor. And you have the option of having on that billboard or that monument one powerful message to anybody who sees it. What would you like that message to be? When you think through the answer to that, it forces you to really think very deeply about what matters to you. And I believe that the reason why today an estimated 85% of people, according to Gallup, are disengaged at work, which not only has an enormous human cost, but has an enormous financial cost on our businesses. In the US, it costs the US economy up to $550 billion a year in lost productivity. People are disengaged because they're not living work according to their values, or because they're letting their employer trample on their values. So the cost is enormous. And that's why I think many people need to do much more work to really actively uncover what their values are in order to live their life according to their values.
Yeah, just like the name of the book, Step Back. You have to step back, understand your purpose, your values, to give yourself a way to get through the rat race. Padmini, are there any questions from the audience?
So the first one's from Adlia Tajar, and she says, could you say more about hiring slow and firing fast? Curious about how work with establishing a healthy work culture that is growth and development oriented, how that works. Right? What about partnering with someone to find a better fit for them, or what's actually in their way? So I think the latter part is really addressing, instead of firing them, actually placing them somewhere else in the organization. And I thought that part was quite interesting.
All right, so it sounds like we have like a couple of different questions layered into one. So let me start with the first one, because I think the first one, to some folks, maybe this is obvious, to other people, it's not obvious. One of the biggest learnings that I had at Google is how to hire people, how to hire well, right? And this is something that I think Google is well known for. And I subsequently copied this at Leap, and I've encouraged all my coachees who work running companies to do the same. Google is known for having a really robust and very kind of like long and hard and laborious hiring process. And I think when you look at it on the outside, sometimes people don't understand why. And when you study a little bit more, and there's been books written about this by Laszlo Bock and others. There's a book called Work Rules, which is great, which I recommend. Part of hiring properly starts with properly writing the job description. I know this sounds incredibly obvious, and it's not. People write a job description from the perspective of what the company needs. That's a mistake. Because as a company, you're out there selling your company, and you're selling this role to a group of people who might be interested. Now, if you're looking to hire the best people, if you're looking to hire A players, which I always say is what you should be doing, right? Then you need to do a better job of selling the role beyond just talking about what you want to hire for. You also need to sell the role from the point of view of what the prospective job hire wants to get out of it, right? So that involves not just telling people about the role and what they're going to do, but it also involves telling people how are they going to grow in this role? What are the growth potentials out of that role? What are the skills that they're going to develop in that role? What are the tangible and non-tangible benefits that they're going to get from that role? And more importantly, you need to give the candidate an idea of what your culture and what your purpose is from the job description. The vast majority of job descriptions today never ever mention the company's values or purpose or mission, which is mind-blowing if you think about it, because you have no idea about the culture from reading that. So that's the first step. The second step, if you want to hire well, is you should never hire by yourself. You need to hire in committee. Like, one of the reasons the Google process is long is because, people will interview with 5, 6, 7, 8 people, right? And the benefit of doing that is that you have different people who are able to give different perspectives. And you, even if you're an INSEAD MBA or an MBA from whatever school, or you're very bright and you're very experienced, you will miss things in your interview process, which if you allow the rest of your team or people from other teams to participate in, they will pick up on things that you don't. And that allows you to make a better decision. The third thing, and I'm going to stop at kind of like, the job piece there, because otherwise we're going to go on way too long. The third thing is, when you're hiring, one of the biggest mistakes I see people making, which is why people make such bad hires, and this is especially true in high growth companies that are designed to grow very fast, is that they conduct the interview process without having clear questions that help tease out whether the candidate is a cultural fit or not, right? So let me give an example. If part of your growth, if part of your culture in your company is we are growth mindset oriented, you need to have questions in your interview process where you can figure out if the candidate that you're interviewing shares that value. As an example, we were hiring for a sales role a year ago, and the guy who was hiring on my team comes and he says, I have this fantastic candidate. I want to make her an offer. I was like, okay, great. And, as part of the process, I'll interview her. And I interviewed her and I said, we're not going to hire this candidate. And he's like, why are you against hiring this candidate? And I was like, well, because, part of our values at Leap is growth mindset. And when I asked her what was the last thing that she did in her, in her life over the past year that really took her outside of her comfort zone, her answer was, well, after 6 months on lockdown, I finally decided to leave my house. And I was like, that doesn't sound to me like a risk taker or somebody who shares our value of being growth mindset oriented, right? So I think if we shift our recruiting approach to recruiting differently, asking the right questions that really tease out values, and also keep an open mind that we shouldn't necessarily hire just for the role, but we should also hire for the person's experience and their abilities, I think we can do a far better job in hiring in general. All right, so that's the hire slow piece, right? I don't know if we have time to go into the rest because
Let's jump to the next question, if we may.
Okay.
And this is from Ashley, and he asked, I also work as a consultant helping leaders with conscious business practices. Some of the issues I have seen is that for the first time in history of the workforce, we now have 5 generations. I didn't even know that. 5 generations working at the same time. The direction and guidance you give to people is based on where they are in their life cycle, as certain things are more important to some versus others. How do you handle the difference in needs and passions from one generation to another, while also keeping in mind the components that you had stated? And how do you handle situations where the actual leader is the problem and they are not self-aware enough to realize it? That's a meaty question as well, so you can pick that apart as you choose.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure that I understood the first part of the question. So, in terms of the generations, I do understand the person's comment that obviously when you're working across so many generations, people have different expectations. People's interpretation of certain values are different, right? And that's absolutely true. I think kind of when you talk about some of the essential abilities of leadership, right? Whether it's humility, self-awareness, right? Which is one of the things this person mentions, good communication, assertive decision-making, et cetera. That for me is transversal. That goes across generations, no matter whether you're a 22-year-old or a 51-year-old. I think, we need to lead in the same way. And that is a challenge without a doubt. When you're talking about, self-awareness, right? I have a video that we did on YouTube, a couple of years ago, which has been really, really well received. And we talk about the 12 characteristics of good leadership. And the first characteristic, which I talk about, and I do it explicitly on purpose, is self-awareness. I think that is one of the most important leadership characteristics today, because I think none of us, as smart or as talented or as humble as we may be, is perfectly self-aware. It's just not possible. And so I think when you talk about improving self-awareness, the first step to that process is really kind of like to do, a leadership diagnostic. A leadership diagnostic, which is a 360 diagnostic, where you get other people to talk about you as a leader, to talk about your skills, to assess you, and to assess you in terms of your level of self-awareness. And the thing that's fascinating about that exercise is that when I take CEOs through this exercise, nobody is ever perfect, right? We assess CEOs on these 12 different metrics, and we ask their teams, their peers, their board, their employees and others to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10. And the area of coaching oftentimes ends up being the area where you have the biggest delta between what they believe and what their team believes, right? And that's where you have the self-awareness gap. That is part of the reason why I believe that doing these kind of diagnostics, why I believe that organizations have to do a lot more in terms of leadership development and training, and why I think coaching is so powerful. Because as Eric Schmidt from Google once said, people are never as good as seeing themselves as others see them from the outside. We just don't know how others see us. That's the Achilles heel of being a human being. You don't know what people say about you or think about you in terms of your leadership abilities. The only way to figure that out is to ask. And if you have a culture of transparency and psychological safety, then you might get pretty close to the truth. But many people, many times we don't, right? So I think that, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's at least, why self-awareness is so important in some ways to get around doing that. The other thing I would just briefly add to that is, if you really want to know what people think about you, you got to ask, and you have to do it often. You can't just wait for your annual or quarterly performance cycle to get feedback from your team. Feedback needs to be a continuous process that you're asking all the time. And one of the questions that I most love asking people, on my team or people that I work with is, what's the one thing that I'm doing that's making your life impossible right now?
This leads into a question I'm going to have about accountability partners, because we talked now about self-awareness. We talked about finding your purpose in life. Why are you doing what you're doing? Unearthing your values, what's your guiding lights or lights. What about accountability partners? What are they? How do you find them? And how can they help you make a life change?
Yeah, great question. So, the reason why people struggle so much with change is exactly what you just mentioned, Robert. It's a lack of accountability, right? And so whether you're talking about our careers, whether you're talking about what we're trying to accomplish at work, or whether you're talking about losing weight, being in better shape, changing careers, whatever, the reason most people don't change, the number one reason when I study people is fear. Fear is the greatest barrier, right? But one of the things that also is a key factor why people don't change is they don't have an accountability partner. What do I mean by an accountability partner? An accountability partner is somebody who is neutral, i.e., it can't be your wife, it can't be your husband, it can't be your best friend. It's somebody that knows you well enough but that will not be afraid of telling you some of the harsh things that you need to hear if you want to make significant changes in your life. Some people have a mentor, right, in their organization, or somebody that maybe was their former professor in business school or in college. Other people have a priest, like they're people who are more religious. They go to church. They have somebody that they're very close to. They have people that they can find out. Other people have coaches, and that's fine. I have a coach as well. And so what I always tell people is, if you want to make big things happen in your life, the more you share those big things, the more they happen. Let me give you a practical example on that. A year and a half ago, I was really struggling with my book. I'm a first-time writer. I didn't exactly know what I was doing. I was struggling to kind of keep momentum and continue to write. I was all alone in this process. Part of being an author, which is so hard, is it's something that you're doing on your own most of the time, especially when you're writing. And, I realized that I needed an accountability partner. And so what I did on purpose is I systematically started to tell people about the book. And I was telling more and more people, and I was telling my parents. And at one point I went to my father and I told my father, I was like, Dad, I promise you, you will have a copy of this book by the end of the year 2022. By Christmas, you will have a copy in your hand. And I told my mom, and I told I don't know how many people about this freaking book. And by doing that, I made myself accountable, because when you have these lofty goals and you want to do something hard, when you start sharing that, you get other people excited. You create these champions, these evangelists for what you're doing, right? And the more you have those evangelists, the more those evangelists you have behind you, the more force it creates. It's like when you look at political candidates who have a lot of momentum. All those people get tired. All those people get exhausted. All those people at some point tell themselves, on the campaign trail, why am I doing this? I'm so exhausted, or I don't have a chance. I'm going to give up. What keeps them going is they are accountable to the millions of people who follow them, right? Artists have the same thing. And so that's the idea behind accountability. And it's also why coaching can be so powerful, because oftentimes when we work with a coach, the coach is the person that when we get together with them every couple of weeks, the first thing a good coach is going to ask you is, hey, Padmini, 2 weeks ago, you said that you were going to go do this, this, and this, and you were going to go meet this person, you're going to go networking, and you were going to redo your resume. Where are we?
Patrick, you're one of the people as a personal board of directors. So in your case, I understand it was INSEAD, fellow INSEAD alums.
Yeah.
Congratulations on having your own board of directors, by the way. But what is it? What is a personal board of directors? Should people try to recreate one in their own lives?
Sure. So the idea behind the INSEAD personal board of directors, and several other top schools do this, is we kind of ripped off the idea from the Young Presidents Organization, which is an organization in the United States. I think they operate outside the United States too. And the Young Presidents Organization, kind of like, part of the reason they started it was they realized that, presidents and CEOs, particularly young founders, are very much alone, and they don't really have anybody to talk to. And so the idea was, let's create a loose group of similarly minded people. Yeah, I see Neil said he's talking about PBOD. Good one, Neil. Let's create a loose group of similar minded people who get together once a month in person, and for 4 hours we kind of have discussions about our lives, our career, and where we're going. And so at INSEAD, what we did, and there's an INSEAD alum who deserves a lot of credit for helping us in the United States in the Bay Area chapter, Alejandro Rivas Micud. I don't know if he's on this call today, but he basically championed this idea of bringing this concept to the Bay Area and launching it to make it available for Bay Area alumni. And so essentially what it is it's for the INSEAD, it is, we meet once a month. It is a group of 8 to 10 INSEAD alumni. They get together at somebody's house, and then the loose structure of the meeting is, it starts with a round of just kind of updates, 2-minute update from everybody at the table on what's going on in their lives. And then there's always some administration and housekeeping. And then 2 alumni, what they will do is they will get up and they will present a pre-prepared presentation on a major problem that they're having in their life. And this can be work related, but it can be related to anything. It could be, my wife is thinking of leaving me. I mean, that was one of my topics several years ago. I brought that topic to our personal board of directors. I said, hey, my wife is thinking of leaving. Here's the situation. How can you guys advise me? You can do it for a job change, a career change. When I was thinking of leaving Google, I did the same, right? So everybody comes and brings a topic. They present it for 20 minutes. And then all of the alumni will then have a period of time to ask clarifying questions. And then if the presenter wishes it, they will give advice and suggestions, right? And then the next person comes, the second alumni comes, and they will give a similar presentation. And so you have 2 presentations. And at the end of that, there are next steps that the presenter agrees to. So again, he is using the group as accountability partners. And at the end of the presentation, they'll say, okay, based on all the discussions and input, here's what I'm taking away. Here are my insights. And here are the 2 or 3 action items that I am committed to take before our next meeting, right? So this dovetails back to the principle of accountability, is I'm making myself accountable to this group. And then a month later, they meet again. And one of the first things will be, okay, well, what happened since the last month, right? So the idea is, to create a loose group of people that meet once a month. They discuss their problems. I know most business schools have this in some shape or fashion, and the INSEAD Personal Board of Directors was modeled based on YPO.
Padmini, is there one more question maybe from the audience?
Just to that point, I want to say, I think it's a brilliant idea. At first, I was a little hesitant because I thought, are we asking too much of other people to have them be part of our personal board of directors if we're not, offering much in return? But actually, having been involved in the LA Alumni Association and now being back in Miami, I think this is something maybe we can take up in national as well with our all our local chapters. This might actually be a really good program to start running, informing groups ourselves and doing it with alumni in our local areas. One quick one that I was interested in, going back earlier to what would be on your monument? What would actually be on your monument?
That's a great question. I think my message to people would be, don't be afraid to try and live a life of meaning and purpose. I think we live in a society where we are so wrapped up in the short term. We are so wrapped up in our careers, our title, our money, our business card, things which we think are important, that we forget about the long term. And one of the questions I always like to ask people when I start working with them is, imagine that you're at a birthday party, surrounded by friends and family and loved ones, and they're celebrating your 80th birthday. What would you like each one of those people to say about your life as a toast? And I think that we don't ask ourselves those kind of questions. But, I think if people have the courage to live a life of meaning and purpose, they ultimately are much more likely to find happiness than if they don't.
You talk in the book, Patrick, about powerful questions. So it seems like a similar topic. What do you mean by that? And how could they help people listening now?
Great question. One of the statistics that I found while doing a lot of research on the topic of leadership is that one of the reasons millennials are so frustrated at work, and I don't think this is specific to millennials, I don't want to single them out, but I think that the younger generation of people have, I think, an important need for recognition at work. They need to know how they're doing. And so they're constantly asking, how did this go? And how did that go? And this thing that I did, what did you think? And sometimes as older people, it can feel a little bit much for us. It can feel a little bit overbearing. It can feel a little bit much. And we oftentimes don't have the time to intelligently answer that question. And it's a mistake, because what the research tells us is that human beings need validation. We need constant feedback, and younger people need that more, right? And so the idea behind powerful questions is powerful questions are a coaching tool, but they're essential in leadership, because what they allow you to do is, a powerful question is essentially an open-ended question, right? So I can ask you, hey, Robert, did you have a good weekend? That's a closed question, because the answer that you give me is going to be either yes or no, right? But if I ask you, hey, Robert, you were telling me about this birthday party that you were having, the other day, and you were going to have it this weekend. How did it go? And what was that like? And what did you get out of it? What did you feel, being surrounded by all those people? That elicits a completely different response. And so what I always try and coach people and tell people, and I use this in my own life, is by asking open-ended questions, we get a lot more information from people than closed questions. And then what we must do as leaders is, when we ask a question from somebody on our team or a peer or somebody else, or even our manager, is don't be afraid of asking subsequent open-ended questions on top of the first one, because that's how you really get to the truth, right? So if you ask somebody, tell me more about why this project failed. Well, it failed because we didn't have enough resource. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Explain that to me in a little bit more detail. And then they're going to go into a little bit more detail. Well, finance didn't give us the budget and blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, and why do you think finance didn't give you the budget? Well, because of this, this, and this. And so you continue down that train of thought of asking one open question after another. And when you do that 3 or 4 times with people, 2 things happen. The first thing is that you cut through the bullshit, and you ultimately get to the real reason. Because if we only ask one question, it's very easy for somebody to just give us the answer that we want to hear and we move on. And the second thing is kind of like, you force the person to really think through their response a lot more, and you encourage them to share more information, perhaps, than sometimes either they were willing to share, or more information that you need to really understand more fully what happens. And so powerful questions are open-ended questions, which are designed to get people to open up more, to trust us more, and to give us more information.
I'd like to use the last minutes to talk about coaching. We talked about personal change topics today. In theory, honestly, they seem easy, but in practice, they seem so challenging to implement. What is the role of a coach in getting to real lasting change?
The role of a coach in getting to real lasting change is to, it's a couple of things. First, I think the role of the coach is to help the person being coached get clarity on what they really want. What do I mean by that? Oftentimes people will come to me and they will be like, I need coaching because, I need my company to do better than it's doing financially. That's not the real reason why they need coaching. That's the reason they're giving me why they need coaching. That's when I want to use open, powerful questions to ask them a couple of more questions to understand why that's so important, right? So first and foremost, the role of coaching is to help you get clarity on what you really want, not what you think you want, right? I need that next promotion. Okay, tell me more. Why do you need that next promotion? Well, I need it because I need to have a better car. And why is having a better car so important to you? Well, I need a better car because my neighbor just got a better car. Okay, well, why does that matter? It matters to me because every time my neighbor gets a better car, I feel self-conscious, and I don't feel like I'm doing my job as a man. That's how you really get to the answer, right? So clarification is one thing, clarity on what people want. The second role of the coach is what I said, it's helping people figure out what the next step is to get what they want, because sometimes the steps aren't obvious. So by asking powerful questions, the coach is going to get you to see new options which you maybe didn't consider before. Right. And the third thing is accountability, right? We talked about this earlier, right? So once you have made a decision, right? Padmini goes, that's it. I've made a decision. I can't take it anymore. Through this coaching, I realize I'm going to leave my job. Then, of course, it's like, okay, Padmini, what's the next step? Well, the next step is to write my resignation letter. Okay, when are you going to do that by? By Monday. Okay, well, in our next session, you're going to tell me how that went, right? So if you want to boil it down very simply on what a coach does, helps you get clarity on what you want and why, helps you figure out what actions you need to take to deliver on what you want, and finally keeps you accountable to make sure that you take the actions that you promised.
And these days, are companies more open to pay for coaching of their employees?
Yes, much more so than before. And there's, I think, two reasons for that. As I think first, as the coaching profession has gotten much more professionalized, and people understand more about what coaching is and what the value is. And I think that second of all, people and organizations are realizing that coaching isn't about fixing people. It's not that we all have challenges. That's true, but it's not like there's anything broken and there's anything wrong with us. I think people are realizing that coaching is the only way that people get better at what they do. I mean, if you look at coaching in sports, if we were tomorrow to say, okay, there's no more coaching in sports, it would be laughable as a concept, right? I mean, every single team in the world in any sports has a coach. And so we have to ask ourselves the opposite question is, why do we not have coaching in business? How are CEOs or anybody in business expected to get better if they don't have coaching?
Besides potentially buying your book, Step Back and Leap, which we talked about today, how can people in the chat benefit from your own coaching experience? What does working with you look like?
I mean, there's a number of different ways people can work with me. I mean, if people just want access to more content, obviously they can follow me on Instagram, on LinkedIn at Patrick Mork Official. I publish a ton of content every single day on all of these topics. That's the easiest way. My website, patrickmork.com, has a bunch of other information. And then, if people want to seriously consider coaching or would like to work with me, then, you can just email me. It's me at patrickmork.com, or just visit my website and, fill out the form and subscribe to our newsletter, and I'll see your email and you can manifest interest in working with me. So those are really the easiest, social media, Patrick Mork Official, patrickmork.com, or it's me at patrickmork.com.
So bonus question time. So did you see the late 70s, early 80s TV show Mork from Ork? Mork played, of course, by Robin Williams. And if so, do you see any similarities to your own name, Mad Mork?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Mork and Mindy back in the day. So I have very fond memories of that show. Similarities with Robin Williams or the show. I think I like to consider myself an optimist. I like to consider myself an upbeat and very positive person. And I've been told that I'm a pretty funny guy when I want to be. So I don't have any aspirations of getting into another career as a comedian or as a stand-up, but I do a lot of public speaking. So that's probably as close as I'll get to stand-up comedy.
You never know. You never know.
But yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Who
well,
knows?
Thank you so much,
possible.
Patrick, for joining us today. Thank you, Padmini, for helping with the questions. Thanks to everybody that joined. We're signing off. It's on the hour. Get back to work or go on to what you're doing wherever you are today, and have a good one.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great weekend.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.